Hey everyone, Mr. Regan here. And up to this point, we've done a lot to prepare for an experiment that we're about to run. We have looked at the variables that will help us understand what we're doing in the experiment. We've looked at how to measure and calculate velocity that we'll need to answer our focus question. And we've looked at the procedure, the step-by-step plan we're going to follow when conducting the experiment. The last part of our experiment is going to be where we look to measure and collect our data in a data table. So let's talk about that. As we conduct our experiment, you're going to need to collect data to help you answer our focus question. If the same strength force is exerted on two different objects, how might their change in velocity be different? The data that you'll be collecting needs to be organized by all the measurements that you're collecting, the calculations that you're going to compute, the variables that you have, and the number of tests you're going to run. There's a lot of information that you're going to need to collect, and in doing so, organize within a data table. So we're going to look at how we're going to set up that data table. So for our experiment, you know that you need to run multiple trials where you're going to be measuring distance and time. You know that you're going to be calculating velocity. You're going to be utilizing force to help you answer that big guiding question. You also know that you're going to be using our lab equipment that you see and what you learned about calculating velocity so that you can figure out how you're going to organize your data into your data table. So how are we going to take all of this and put it into a data table? Well, we got to ask ourselves, when we're thinking about setting up our data table, what sort of things are we going to record? We know that we're going to record some velocity measurements, some calculations, and we're going to have a lot of trials. So thinking about our equations, thinking about how we've run our experiments, okay, we need to create a data table that is organized for you to collect all of these different speed measurements and velocity calculations for all of your trials. Now, when you set up a data table, you have to decide what your headers and labels will be within your velocity data table. So when we look at a normal table, whether it is for data in a data table for experiments or really any table for anything in school, we have our header as to what our data table is about. So this is our experiment velocity data table. Our headers are at the top. Our labels are on the side, and then our data would go somewhere in the middle here. For every header we have, it also has a label. So whatever data I put, for example, in this box, has a header and a label that help me explain what I did here, whether it's a specific trial I ran, whether it's a specific measurement I was getting, and so on. So if we're thinking about my experiment example from the previous video, with the tennis ball and the basketball, we know we need to measure the distance that they fall. We need to time them as they fall. We need to record all that in the data table. We need to calculate the velocity. We need to do it 3 times. So these 5 things are going to show up in my data table. The distance they travel, the time they travel. I'm going to record all that in the data table, the velocity we calculated, and the fact that we have 3 trials. So if you notice, I have my headers here and my labels here. In my data table, I put as my headers all the things that I'm measuring and calculating. You could do it your own way and in a different way as well, but that's what I'm doing for my headers. My labels are the different things that we're measuring and the number of times we do it. So we have tennis ball 1 and basketball 1, so maybe that's like my first trial, tennis ball 2 and basketball 2, and so on for 3. Now notice, with each box of data here, it tells me what I was measuring and the specific measurement I needed. So for example, the distance the tennis ball traveled when I dropped it, the time the tennis ball traveled when I dropped it, the force that was being applied when I dropped it. And then here I would actually have to calculate velocity and put it into there. So notice, for every header I have and the data I have, it connects with one of my labels, so I know what I was measuring and what object was being used in that measurement. So go ahead and take a second. Do you understand what variables and measurements you need for your data table? Thinking about, for example, my imaginary experiment. Do you understand how to create your data table and record your data in a data table using headers and labels? Oh, that's not what you want to have happen. If your answer is yes, put your X in green. If any of those things are confusing, yellow or red, and reach out. Otherwise, good luck setting up your data table.